Sometimes, as history has showed us, the best things come during the worst times. Where do you think the saying, millionaires are made from recessions, comes from? And if you think that doesn't apply to cars, you're dead wrong. The Ferrari F40 was built because people weren't buying Ferraris anymore, and the Camaro was built to remind Ford who's boss. But there are so many other cars that have a wonderful underdog story, but just sadly never got the spotlight. I am Mark Roden, and this is a deep dive on the Pontiac Fiero GT. In 1978, the United States was going through a gas crisis. Gas was either not available, or if it was available, you better be Anderson Silva at the gas station. And car companies were struggling, especially American ones. You see, America's take on the car world up until this point was always large, gas-guzzling V8s that smelt really good for some reason. I know you know what I'm talking about. Those freaking old muscle cars, they always smell like heaven when they drive by. It's really weird. But this gave Japanese and even German car companies the opportunity to get their foot in the door and start selling their much smaller inline-4 powered sedans. But GM didn't really like that. They had so many projects that would never actually see the light of day during this period because they were frantically trying to figure out how to stop the rampage of Japanese car manufacturers. And the last thing on their mind would be to bring another sports car to this market, especially since they didn't want to take the spotlight away from their main sports car, the Corvette. That is, until a group of incredibly young engineers would come to them with an idea so crazy that it might just work.
Kayla, are you crazy? Are you out of your mind? He could have been a rapist. He could have been a pedophile. Why would you do this?
These kids would come to GM with the concept of the Pontiac Fiero, a two-seater sports car with the engine in the rear, something GM had been thinking of doing to the Corvette for quite some time now, and at first they were incredibly doubtful, but luckily they gave the kids 1 year to bring them back a running prototype of the Fiero, and those crazy boys did it in 6 months. After that, GM was sold, and they gave the green light for production on the Fiero. This is because it was something completely different from the Corvette. Instead of a roaring V8, it would use an inline-4 that got 31 miles per gallon city and over 50 miles per gallon highway, which is like really freaking good for the 70s, guys. Instead of letting the gas crisis ruin their image, these kids used it as an opportunity to make another sports car, just like how I'm going to use this opportunity to ask you to subscribe to the channel, since over 80% of you lads are not, so help your boy out, please. But back to the car. Obviously, building a car takes time, and so the Fiero wouldn't actually see the showroom floor until 1984, 6 years after the initial prototype build.
One of the 10 best cars of 1984, says Car and Driver magazine. Fiero, fuel injected, economical, and only from Pontiac. Pontiac builds excitement.
Now, normally cars do take a decent amount of time after their prototype is released to actually hit showroom floors, but this one took very long, and that's mainly because the head of the project had so many obstacles to overcome. To name a few, he only had a budget of $400 million, which seems like a lot, but it was only a quarter of the average cost of GM's current projects. He also was Turkish and quite young, which didn't sit too well with some of GM's higher-ups. And on top of all that, they would split the engineer team into two separate groups, which meant that they would constantly be sending blueprints back and forth to each other, resulting in a bunch of time being wasted. But against all odds and multiple threats of his project being shut down, he would finally release the car in 1984, and the world actually kinda loved it, despite Pontiac being on a downhill spiral. It was completely different from anything any American car company had made before. We had seen mid-engine designs, but nothing that was not only economic, but also sporty. And because of that, the car would sell 136,000 models the very first year. That's incredibly good, Pontiac.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Now, I would be lying if I told you this car was a rocket at launch. It wasn't. Remember, this car was built to save money on gas, but also be fun to drive. And if you knew how to drive it, it sure was fun. They did only come with a 2.5 liter inline-4, which was massively out of place for GM's current sports car lineup. And it did only make 90 horsepower, which once again wasn't anything great at all. But keep in mind that this car weighed only 2,400 pounds, which is only 200 pounds heavier than an NA Miata. So if you think a Miata is a fun car, then chances are you would have liked this thing too. On top of that, the car was rear-wheel drive, and remember, the engine was behind you, which did cause for a little bit of snap oversteer, but every mid-engined tiny wheelbase car is going to experience that. Just look at the MR2. That thing is literally known for spinning out when you press on the brakes in a corner, and the Fiero just, it just like to do that as well. And listen, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. The launch of the Pontiac Fiero does sound pretty disappointing, but it only goes up from here, so bear with me. I mean, I haven't even mentioned the GT yet. Just 1 year after the launch of the Fiero in 1985, the gas crisis would come to an end. Talk about some bad time in Pontiac. But now this gave Pontiac the green light to do what they wanted to do with the Fiero since the very beginning. Make it go fast. And so they would release the wonderful Fiero GT, now equipped with a 2.8 liter V6 and a damn Muncie 4-speed transmission, which, if you know the Muncie, you know how much of a good idea that was. And this brand new, much larger engine would give the Fiero the little extra juice that it needed, now sitting comfortably at 140 horsepower, which once again may not seem like a lot of horsepower, but remember, it's the 80s and this is a very small sports car meant to handle corners well, not go fast in a straight line. If you wanted to do that, you bought the Camaro. And once again, the public loved it. All the critics that said the car was too slow in 1984 finally were happy, and it once again sold really well at 76,000 models, a third of those being from the GT model. But there was still one big issue that needed to be addressed.
Monsieur. Picked it up in America, actually.
The Americans, they make such a car?
Yes, extraordinary outfit called Pontiac. The new Fiero GT.
In 1986, the car would finally get a massive facelift, flattening out the rear end and making the front end a little bit more aggressive looking. This model is the one everybody knows and loves from the Fiero lineup, and it's called the Fastback. Now, I do want to make it very clear that not every single model from the 1986 year was offered as the Fastback one, only later models, since it wouldn't be released until around halfway through the year. But either way, the car was now damn near perfect. I don't think I've brought it up yet, so I guess I will now, but this car was still being sold as a commuter car to the people, because GM, for God knows what reason, did not want the people to think that this was a sports car, even though we all deep down knew that it was. Now, the engine was not touched since the 1985 model year, but due to the new fastback design, it bumped the sales numbers back up to 83,000 models. Well played, Pontiac. The following year, in 1987, nothing really changed. They had a couple new colors were offered. The inline 4 got 2 more horsepower, and probably one of the funniest moves in automotive history would happen. Pontiac released this quote-unquote option to have your Fiero be built to look like a Ferrari 308, and they would call it the Pontiac Mera. But that obviously didn't last very long, because Ferrari was not going to stand for that and sued them, causing GM to stop building them, which meant that only 247 Meras would ever be produced, meaning that they're a pretty damn rare car. For the next and sadly final year of 1988, the car once again didn't get many changes to the engine, but did however get plenty of changes to things like suspension and brakes, which remember is completely fine because the car was still sitting comfortably at 140 horsepower in a 2,400 pound body. So if they wanted to make the car handle even better and really go all out on the whole handling monster idea that they had, I'm all for it. The final Pontiac Fiero would roll off the production line in August of 1988, and we have never seen it since.
Ooh, let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin.
This is serious.
I know. This really is the world's smallest violin. See?
The Pontiac Fiero started its life as a car that constantly had to fight just to keep itself alive, and even though this car single-handedly would go out and save Pontiac as a whole, it was sadly not enough. Pontiac died as a car brand in 2010, and along with it would be everyone's love and affection for the Pontiac Fiero. It's like one day people loved the Fiero and the very next they just completely forgot about it. And sure, the Fiero was dangerous, and the V6 in particular could get quite unreliable, but it was a mid-engine sports car that was good on gas and still a blast to drive from a time when America was getting absolutely railed by Japanese car companies. And yes, the car is dangerous. It likes to spin out, and if you get hit in the back, back, it can cause a fire. As a matter of fact, it can cause a fire just by sitting there. But we are car guys. You can't sit there and tell me you constantly obey traffic laws and always go the speed limit, because you don't. We take the risks of owning these horrible financial investments on wheels and making these terrible decisions when building our cars, because we can see what others can't in a car. And that's exactly why I made this video, to help you open your eyes a little bit to a little car from a dying company that, despite all odds, would win. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of today's deep dive on the Pontiac Fiero. Let me know what other deep dives you'd like to see. I am, like, for some reason out of breath. Like, every time I read a paragraph today, I had to, like, take a quick 3-minute breather to let my, like, breath get. It makes no sense. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about, though. Sometimes when your mouth just gets dry. Like, it's dry right now. I've been talking for 20 seconds. It's dry again. I don't know what's going on. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I do appreciate it. I appreciate all the support. I made a top 50 cars in order to celebrate the 50,000 subscriber special, and we're already at like 51.3 thousand subscribers. So you guys are absolutely blowing up the channel. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but thank you guys so much. You guys are blowing up the channel recently, and I really appreciate it. In terms of the Integra build, I know someone's going to ask about it. So in terms of the Integra build, it's still there, man. It was such a stupid time to buy the car because it's Christmas, and I had to buy a bunch of Christmas gifts, and I'm also trying to get like the cheapest possible parts I can get in terms of like the best deals on marketplace and stuff like that, so that I can like really make this a budget build. But it's just taken so much longer than I thought it would, but it is still there. I'm just waiting on a couple parts, and we'll get started on that. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. Das Vidania, and have a nice night.